SuperTalk Mississippi media production.
The Common Collector is the premier local sports cards and memorabilia destination in Northeast Mississippi, where there's something special for everyone. Visit the Common Collector at 704 Cruz Street in Corinth, open Wednesday to Saturday.
This is Gerard Gibert, and thank you for listening to MidDays here on SuperTalk Mississippi.
MidDays with Gerard Gibert is on the air. MidDays with Gerard Gibert is powered by C-Spire. Power your home or business with C-Spire Fiber. To learn more, visit supertalk.fm/C-Spire. C-Spire Fiber powers SuperTalk Mississippi. Get ready to go beyond the headlines and join a meaningful conversation with people from around the state. You're listening to MidDays with Gerard Gibert here on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to MidDays, SuperTalk Mississippi. I'm your host, Gerard Gibert, along with Rhino in the Element Wealth Studio, guiding you through the middle of your day with facts, fodder, and fine music on this
Friday Eve.
Had to get my bearings after that one-day trip where I was up pretty much 24 hours. Like, what day is this now? So
I'm right there with you.
Oh, man.
I showed up yesterday after a long weekend, and I had Scott on the video, and then I look up, and you're in the studio, and I'm like, I haven't had enough coffee.
Yeah, so appreciate Scott, of course, for filling in yesterday. Welcome back after a long weekend. Hope it was restful and enjoyable. Easter, you spent some time with the family?
I didn't get up to Tupelo to spend time with the family. I was a little busy down this way, and then had to take Porch Cat to the vet for emergency surgery, but she's all good.
I heard you talking about that.
Yeah.
So I have a little news to report on that as well from a pet perspective. Our Black Lab night, you recall a couple of years ago, we lost our precious Black Lab Brute. And it took my wife a little over a year to kind of get over that. And we finally bit the bullet and got us a new one. Knight is his name, Knight. Man, he loves to chase a ball. It's kind of a rubber, squishy ball, but it glows in the dark. And he absolutely he'll like come with in his mouth, he'll come at you and like push on your leg with it. Like, play with me now. Throw this ball now. So I'm doing that yesterday with him while I'm doing some work out in my yard yesterday afternoon. And depending on what section of the yard I throw it in, we've got like a bed that separates two sections. It's got big azaleas in it. He likes to run under and through the azaleas. Well, I've got some painters at the house, and they were gone for the day with the rain, and they just kind of stacked their ladders, their aluminum ladders, on the other side of those azaleas. And I don't think about that. I throw the ball. Sure enough, he runs through it, and I heard this crash of the ladders. Even though they were lying down, I'm thinking, oh, my gosh, he just got stuck in the ladders or it hurt his legs or something. So I ran over there, and he was fine, except he had a scratch on his nose because you don't have a lot of skin. Dogs don't. We took him to the vet, and he's fine. Just had to put some Neosporin on. It wasn't bleeding. He wasn't whining. Wasn't in pain. It startled him more than anything, the noise of those. When I heard it, I expected the worst, and fortunately, it was just that little scratch. But you never know. Just want to make sure, especially with not a lot of skin right there. I want to make sure we knew how to care for the wound. Of course, he'll recover and he's fine, but it startled him as it always does. And when I approached him, he kept backing up. He thought he did something wrong, which is natural. I mean, it's just their instinct. And I had to calm him down and make sure he understands. No, I'm here to care for you, to see about you. You didn't do anything wrong. So anyhow, but you said you had a little scared that there were some tumors, right? But
yeah, the doctor, I was taking her in for like a pre-whatever checkup, and the doctor called me and said, hey, is it okay if we sedate her? She's acting up a little bit. We sometimes have to sedate cats. It just depends on their demeanor. She's great with you. She doesn't like us a whole lot, so we got to sedate her. Like, that's fine. Go ahead. Do what you got to do. About 15 minutes later, he called me back and he goes, looked in her ears, and she's got one large tumor in her left ear that's blocking the ear canal, and 3 small tumors that, if we don't take care of them, they're going to be just as bad or worse in the right ear. I was like, I can do that. She's already sedated. That's half the cost of a surgery anyways. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, but I hope this isn't thousands of dollars. But, yeah, do whatever you got to do, Doc.
Yeah.
And, he called me back about 30 minutes later. He had worked into his lunch break at that point and got it all taken care of and told me I could come pick her up later in the afternoon.
Okay. Well, so that may have had an impact on the hearing, right? I mean, it could have been obstructing. And so it's a good thing you got that taken care of. Well, man, oh, man. So a lot of stuff between me and you happening with our pets there, but we, of course, love them and want to take care of them and make sure they're healthy and get everything they need. So we got a lot going on across the state of Mississippi and the country. Today, Douglas Carswell, president and CEO of the Mississippi Center for Public Policy, will be in the Element Wealth studio at 11:05. Jeremy Nelson, president at Element Wealth, he'll sort down all the stuff happening in the markets, and he'll be in the studio as well. He, of course, is always insightful with respect to that. As far as your money is concerned, the Dow started out in the negative pre-market. It's turned around past the old unchanged line, the old kangaroo. It's up 299 points, just shy of 300. The NASDAQ up 330. Yesterday was a good day. Not a whole lot of news driving it other than, of course, everybody's is on the edge of their seats about any news concerning trade deals and the tariff policies. It's China's Xi Jinping that said, yeah, we hadn't really been in any talks. I don't know what to believe out of those people, honestly. We hadn't been in any talks, and we're prepared to endure long, painful gains. This is not surprising coming from the communist regime leader. They're fine with that, right? If that means people even die in their country, that's acceptable losses in their view to win, I guess, what they would view as a war that they see as a contest between their country and this country regarding trade. I do think this is a little bit more difficult hill to climb for the president and his trade strategy than is the case with the EU and other countries. China, again, just doesn't have any regard for human life, and and they're irrational in that respect. And that just makes negotiations that much more complex, I think is the way to put it. So we'll see what happens with all that. He seems to think, does Xi Jinping, he seems to believe that, yeah, they can just wait this thing out and we'll be fine, that they can inflict pain on our country. You know, they're heavily dependent on exports for growth, and they've got a bunch of debt as well. They grew their debt by 5% last year. Of course, you think they did based on what they're reporting. We don't really know. There's a lot of skepticism, as there always is on any information that flows from the CCP.
And for whatever reason, they do allow the news to come out about every 5 or 6 months or so of a group of retirees or elderly people showing up at some bank that's taken all their money in their retirement, and they're there to protest and try to get their money. For some reason, China's okay with that news coming out.
Yeah.
On a semi-annual basis. And it's usually the same kind of story, different location, different bank.
So true.
It's just weird what they play close to the vest and weird what they think nobody will care enough about to worry about it.
It truly is unpredictable. You can't tell. And then, of course, whatever information that they disclose is always under scrutiny as to its legitimacy, its accuracy. It's honesty. Just don't know. So chief executives of Walmart and Target and Home Depot conducted a closed-door meeting Monday with the president. This has made news in the last 24 hours. And they told President Trump that these tariff policies could disrupt supply chains and lead to empty shelves in the coming weeks, as soon as 2 weeks. Americans may face, kind of sounds like COVID all over again. That's what they're telling these retail executives. That's what they're telling the president. They declined, by the way, to comment on any of the specifics. Walmart CEO said, "We had a productive meeting with President Trump and his team and appreciated the opportunity to share our insights." Target CEO, "We had a productive meeting with President Trump and our retail peers to discuss the path forward on trade. We remain committed to delivering value for American consumers." So it's the old productive meeting line, I guess, is what we're getting. I don't know what to expect, how much that is figuring into the president's plan. Just thought that was interesting that they were able to schedule this meeting and sit down with the president. I'm glad he took it and heard their feedback. We're stepping aside for a break, coming right back with Sticks bumping us out of this segment. We're in the Element Well studio, just getting started. This segment of Middays with Gerard Gibert is brought to you by Covington County Hospital in Collins, where your health matters.
Middays with Gerard Gibert.
Let's do this.
On SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Let's go.
We are back with you in the Element Well studio. Mo says empty shelves at Target, Walmart because their Chinese goods haven't arrived. Sounds like good news to me. Mose, what would you say that to the people who are going to lose their jobs working at Walmart and Target because they can't sell anything, have nothing to sell? I don't think that's good news. Now,
well, in fairness, most of these goods will be durable goods and very few will be groceries of any kind.
No, that's absolutely true. But they still, though, they can't make a living just on groceries. I mean, neither of those companies can survive if all they sell. Well, Target's not in the grocery business, right? So Walmart, I think, is the nation's largest grocer by volume, if I'm not mistaken. But we can't just flip a switch and say, okay, all that stuff's going to be made here in the United States. There's a lot of stuff consumers rely on in the stores that is produced, unfortunately, in China. It's the length of time issue. I've talked to a lot of businesses that have said, we don't know if we can survive this. Small businesses that have built their business around what has been an environment that has existed for quite some time, where they buy these products that they sell, or they're components that come. They're either a retailer or a distributor or even a manufacturer who import components into the manufacturing process. There needs to be a resolution. It's even I think what helped the markets yesterday, Rhino, was that the Treasury Secretary, who's sort of become the de facto spokesperson for the trade and tariff efforts of the Trump administration, that's Scott Bessent, Treasury Secretary, he said this isn't sustainable. And so it's not like, okay, you just go to your corner, China, and we'll go to ours and everything will be hunky-dory. No, he said this is not sustainable. We got to have something. And the president then came out and softened his stance somewhat, said, yeah, 145%, which is what's currently in place, that's too high. It's going to come down a lot from there. It won't be zero, but it's going to come down a lot. And so the markets reacted positively to that news. But then China comes out and says, we're not in any talks. We're not in any hurry. You don't know what to believe, like I said, coming out of China. So I do think we need a resolution to the situation. And it needs to be one that I think favors this country or certainly puts us on equal footing with our trading partners. But I think the notion that certainly for the next foreseeable period of time that we can just exist unilaterally without any trading partners, I think is a bit naive, honestly. The president knows that. His Treasury Secretary said as much. It's just a matter of getting through what negotiations are occurring. I really think that one of the things that's rattling markets is that there was an expectation, although no time frame was ever given. If you think about it, Rhino, the information that has flowed from the White House has always been, in the Trump administration, we got a lot of people that are talking to us, phones ringing off the hook, we're having all these meetings. Even earlier this week, it was reported that, we actually have agreements, documents, outlining agreements in hand. 15, 17, I think is what was reported. But we still don't have any agreements that have been executed. And that's what everybody's waiting for, kind of on the edge of their seats and hanging on to every word coming out of the White House as to the progress there. That's what they're looking for. Let's get an agreement done. And I do think that will be a domino effect, and that will open the door up for more agreements getting consummated and again, pen to paper. Nothing happens until there's pen on paper.
I was just checking the reported percentage of products on the shelves at Target and or Walmart from China.
Yeah.
Walmart, as recently as 2018, had as much as 80% of the products on the shelves that were from China. That's down to 60% in the last reporting. Target, the highest it's been was in 2017. It was at 60% of all the products on the shelves were made in China.
Yeah.
As of the latest reporting, approximately 30% of Target's products are still sourced from China, and they are hoping to reduce this to 25% by the end of the year.
Yeah, and I think that's reasonable, but 25% is massive. Let's be honest. That is significant to a company like that. Significant. It is really not tenable for the company to be viable long term. Sure, they can endure some losses. You don't want to see that, though, because losses are going to force management to make some tough decisions, and usually that means people lose their jobs. And remember where a lot of that stuff's coming from? It's being imported by American companies who are selling it to Target, that are serving as the intermediary there. Not in all cases, but in many cases. And a lot of those products are, again, components coming from China being used by American companies to produce these products. Now, Brian in Madison says, so what if the shelves are empty at the big box stores? Let them figure out a solution to get American-made products on the shelves. Corporate America is to blame for all China-manufactured products in stores anyway. This is exactly what Trump is trying to change, and Americans need to sooner realize that we're going to have to pay a little more for quality American-made products as opposed to the cheap Chinese crap that's usually thrown out after short-term use. Brian, I hear you, man, but I will tell you, it's not quite that cut and dry. There are no American substitutes for the vast majority of what we're talking about here. There are none. It's not like you can say, I'm buying this stuff from China, I'm going to start buying it from domestic manufacturers. There's no substitute. The American manufacturing of most of these products is all shifted because of the lower costs associated with that. And I don't think most Americans want to hear the idea, you just got to pay more. Because we're not talking about a little more, we're talking about a lot more. Now, that's not a promotion of Chinese-made products. It's just a mathematical reality. That's why I believe that we will see a revolution of repatriation of manufacturing. We're seeing lots of manufacturers talk about that, domestic manufacturers talk about making stuff here. But it won't be like it has been traditionally or like it was 40 years ago when we started seeing a shift overseas. These will be, as we said before, highly automated factories that won't have a bunch of people in them. That's the only way they will be able to produce products at a cost and a price point that we Americans will buy. You can't just say, hey, buy American, it's only 2% more. That may work, but if you say buy America, it's double, they're going to say, oh, okay, well, I just can't afford it. And then nothing's sustainable, nothing's tenable, nothing's viable. That it doesn't work. So yeah, I guess you can blame corporate America, but that's because of American consumers. We're the ones that want cheap. How many of us out there say, yeah, I'm going here, I'm buying here and there. It's $1 less. Some will pay for the convenience. Very few that I know of will say, I'll pay the premium for American made. Most of the vehicles we drive that are produced by American manufacturers, they're not made in America. They're made elsewhere because of the low labor cost. We've been accustomed to that. We consumers have driven this low-cost mentality. And it's not just the big box stores, by the way, Brian. It's lots of small and mid-sized family-owned companies as well that rely on those low-cost products. I'm hearing some say, you've seen many interviews, yeah, I don't know how much longer I can sustain this. And I know you feel like, hey, we just got to get through this difficult, tumultuous time. I'm with them. But most companies don't have the kind of financial wherewithal to stay around. The big box guys do, I agree, but they'll have to start making some changes to deal with the situation as well. I mean, the shareholders will demand it, and they rely on shareholders for capital to operate their businesses. That's just the way it works. Elon Musk, by the way, he announced after his company, Tesla, reported earnings down 71%. Precipitous decline in revenue, not so much in revenue, but certainly in the bottom line. And he has announced he's going to step away, for the most part, from Doge. Doge is going to stay in place, but he announced he's going to step away, and he's going to return to focusing on his duties as the CEO of the company and his other enterprises. He is still really betting the farm on autonomous vehicles. Says he hopes to have autonomous taxis implemented in full scope in the city of Austin, Texas. That's where they're piloting it by June, and expects to continue to implement that technology and those services in other cities as well in the short term. But he's absolutely betting the entire company, and that's what investors are betting on, autonomous vehicles. Not just EVs, but autonomous. And his company leads in the efforts to produce the autonomous vehicle technology. My understanding is Rhino Phoenix already has lots of AVs available. I don't know what's unique about Phoenix, but already available. I've talked to some people that have experienced that and felt perfectly safe and comfortable in that. It's a matter of getting accustomed to it and used to it. We're coming right back in the Element Wealth studio.
From the Seabrook. Middays with Gerard Gibert.
It is on
SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Middays. We are in the Element Wealth studio. Appreciate Scott Sands for filling in yesterday. I had the honor and privilege, Rhino, of giving a little presentation to the Mississippi Department of Transportation leadership team. Appreciate Executive Director Brad White for having me down to the MDOT headquarters. Really enjoyed being around some great folks. And, one thing I'll pass on. It is clear that the leadership team there truly does respect and enjoy working for Executive Director White. They gave him a little award, had a little recognition for him after my presentation. That was pretty cool to witness that. Neil from Pontotoc says, I enjoyed your leadership talk yesterday. You did a great job. Really appreciate that, Neil. Thanks for your attention. Thanks for having me. And hopefully there was a nugget or two that maybe you could include in your leadership, and appreciate your service to the state of Mississippi as well. So Tim and McGee says, I do know this, as bad as I hate to say it, the quality of Canadian steel and aluminum is so much better than our own that's made in the U.S. I've heard that as well, and it could be, Tim, that we just sort of got out of the the business, of producing steel. And more importantly, because we kind of diminished the industry, we stopped innovating because there's little opportunity. I've heard the same thing, Rhino, about lumber. The lumber that we primarily use to frame up structures comes from Canada. And it's more to do with climate than anything else. And if you've ever seen a map of the existence of the trees that are used to produce that lumber, it's like the whole dang country of Canada is those trees. I mean, it's replete, right, with that stand of trees that are harvested to produce lumber. But I'm told that because of the winters enduring more, that it takes longer for, I guess, the trees to mature, but it's harder. The actual lumber itself is made
do you think about how you age a tree? When you cut it down, you count the rings. In colder climates, especially if the climate is colder year-round, each tree ring is denser and thinner. So the tree grows slower, but that slower growth wood is a much denser wood product.
Yeah. So it's not a function of, the Canadians just do lumber better than we do. It has to do with climate. Now,
it's actually believed that is at least one contributing factor to the popularity of the famous Stradivarius violins.
Okay.
Because they were made with wood from the Black Forest that had just endured what's known as the Little Ice Age.
Right.
Where it was a century of colder than usual temperatures. Well, all that wood in the Black Forest was much denser than what had previously been used, and that dense wood gave a richer sound to the violins it was making.
Yeah, makes sense. I've heard that as well. So the downside is, who the heck wants to live in the frozen tundra where these trees are? In fact, many may not realize the population of Canada is like, 40 million people or something. Help me out on that. That's about equivalent to the state of California.
40.1.
Okay. So you've got
California's 39.2.
Well, it's essentially California spread into a landmass that's about 8 or 10x California.
And most of that's in Quebec.
Yeah, that's true. The population you're talking about. Yeah, it's one of the major cities. When you think about the major cities, it's Quebec and Toronto would be the other one, which is just across the lake from Buffalo. I mean, Toronto, it's kind of interesting. Toronto and Buffalo, they're kind of integrated somewhat, just have been through the years. And then you go out to the west of British Columbia, which is, by the way, beautiful. But you got Vancouver, which is a fabulous city, but it's not all that big. I mean, it's not, population-wise. But think about that. There are 40 million people in Canada. That's equivalent to the state of California, our most populous state, for sure. But contrast that to 340 million people in this country. So a little more than 10%. That's what Canada represents in terms of population. So Timmy McGee, by the way, this was on Tuesday. I didn't get to this. He said, "I'm proud of you, Gerard, and SuperTalk. Who'd have thought it? I just don't get comfortable." Oh, yeah, we didn't cover that and didn't want to stay. Appreciate the nice feedback, though, Tim, and thanks for tuning in. Let's see. There was something else that came in. Scott and Raleigh. In regards, Gerard, can you tell me an item that is made in China that is an absolute necessity to our everyday needs? I cannot think of any. Well, as in regards to the shelves at Walmart, I guess, Scott, that's kind of a subjective question. What's an absolute necessity? I mean, you think appliances are necessary? Walmart sells appliances. Do you think home goods, flatware, for example, linens, that sort of stuff, is that a necessity? I mean, I don't know. I would say that most American homes have flatware in them, have linens in them, sheets and the like, for example. They have other sorts of home goods, small, limited amount of furniture. Those are big items. Clothing, I would say that's a necessity. Most of the clothing in Walmart, that's where it's made. I would think most people would deem appliances a necessity. Just think that right now, 80% of what's in those stores, and it's not just Walmart. We just think about Walmart because they're the world's and the nation's largest retailer, has the biggest presence. But certainly not just them. So my understanding is our friends at Ace Bolt & Screw, lots of the materials in there are manufactured. in China, right? And that's just because there's no American substitute. I mean, if you want to be in that business...
At the price point, yeah.
That's right, at the price point. But
the federal government buys bags of bolts that cost $10,000 every day of the week.
Yeah, because they're
made in America.
Right.
To very exacting specs.
Yes, and that's how those companies that produce them are able to survive, because they're the only ones that can meet the federal government specifications, which largely are established so only American companies. It's a bit of a protectionism, but we taxpayers are paying the bill. So this bag of bolts for $10,000 that we could get from China for a fraction of that, right? So
but you can't really trust China at scale.
I agree. And I said before, I think this is more of a national security issue than anything, that already we've got China shutting down the ports and saying, we're not going to send these containers over. And that's what I'm hearing from lots of small and mid-sized businesses. I got so long I can survive. If I don't get new product in, I don't have anything to sell. I'm not going to make it. There is no domestic substitute.
First thing that popped in my head when the question was raised about what's something on the shelves at Walmart that you need, and I was thinking, well, I always kind of joked in the pharmacy that there aren't that many things that if you don't have it in the next 5 minutes, you're going to have a problem. But syringes for like a diabetic, those are one. And not to put them on blast or anything, but BD, the brand that manufactures a lot of syringes used by diabetics, those until very recently were manufactured predominantly in China. I think as of the last year or two, they've invested and ramped up production in the U.S., but I don't know if they are completely 100% manufactured in the U.S.
So Scott says everything you just mentioned is made by a producer in the USA. Yeah, I agree with you, but only the more affluent in our society can afford it. I think that's what's missing, Scott. It's not that there's not a substitute. In many cases, there aren't. I mean, I'd have to take a little time to do some research on that. It's absolutely true. There are lots of products. There is no American equivalent or substitute, but certainly not one at the same price point. So I agree. You want some sort of specialty version of that, like we were talking about your example of the bolts, the screws that the government buys that meet certain specifications. The rest of us don't need to spend $10,000 for a bag of bolts. The government says, yeah, we'll do that because these are the only ones that meet those specifications. But in general, for lots of those products, I mean, there's a lot of people that can't afford to go to a specialty store or even an American department store, most of which are carrying clothes, for example, that are made in China. They're not going to pay the premium. I mean, you can go buy $5,000 suits, for example, that are made in America, that are kind of commissioned by Italian. They produce them here, but it's Italian companies and designers. I'm just speaking about that specifically. And there are lots of other examples like that. But to suggest that, hey, all these equivalents exist at the same price point, I think is really dismissing reality, which is you got people in China, children often in China, that are in these factories working for peanuts a day. And here in this country, it's $40 an hour, all fully loaded with all the other burden associated on top of their salary, and that just makes stuff way more expensive. People, the vast majority of people in this country can't afford that and just would not buy. They do without. So we, I believe, are the ones who demanded cheap. Who out there says, yeah, I'm willing to pay substantial premium for the American-made equivalent? Substantial. I don't mean a little bit. I mean a lot. I just don't think many people say, well, I just would do without. And that's not tenable. That's not viable. We're coming right back in the Element Wealth studio.
You already. Are we going to do this? Middays with Gerard Gibert.
Keep rolling. 3, 2, 1.
On SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. Rhino and I are just doing a little research on the break, something that came to mind just from my business days was I remember we got to a point, I think this is back in the early 2000s, Rhino, that monitors, talking about computer monitors in particular. Now they're all flat screens now, but remember there was a time where they were big boxy units before we had plasma and LCD that we do today. So it's kind of cool. All these things are razor-thin flat screens, but all made overseas. Japan, honestly. It's where all the glass manufacturing occurred. North Korea, I think, as well. So we were trying to determine if there are any domestically manufactured televisions.
We are still the world leader in one aspect of the TV industry.
Okay, what's that?
Outdoor TVs.
Oh, who makes those?
Sunbright TV.
I've seen those advertised. Yep.
Out of Thousand Oaks, California. They are apparently the top-of-the-line outdoor TVs. But they don't just have Cadillac model prices. They've got, here's a 65-incher for about the same price you'd pay for one out of China, about $1,800.
Yeah,
and it can survive outside.
But I can tell you, I've been tracking that company now that I think about it for a while. They started out by making projectors, I want to say. I may be wrong about this, but I mean they kind of start out with like theater sort of setups with a big screen. A white screen that you would project on. And the idea is to have something outside that you could see through the sunlight, right? That's yep. Where, hence the name. But that's highly specialized. I don't know that anybody in the state of Mississippi's got one of those, honestly. Right? They come down in price.
Sports bars with some.
That's probably true. But they've come down in price.
Oh, yeah.
Quite a bit. There was a time when you would pay a significant premium, but that's highly specialized. That's not something you're going to go spend extra money on to hang up in your keeping room, your den, or something like that. But, yeah, I would say that's a pretty big industry that we rely on. And you looked up another one. I found the same thing, Element Electronics, which whom I've never even heard of. What'd you say, North Carolina?
Yeah, they're out of Fairfield County, South Carolina.
South Carolina, but final assembly in?
They're actually made in America. It's Vizio that has manufacturing in the U.S. with final assembly in Mexico.
Okay, gotcha. I'd much rather pay very little for an everyday product than a whole lot for something that was manufactured here, says Ben from Madison. You nailed it, though, Gerard. The only way we can get the cost down for these products would be through automation, and the labor unions will never allow this. So all these people who are saying these tariffs will create jobs aren't thinking the whole policy through, in my opinion. I totally agree with you. But again, I favor it, as I've said, for national security purposes. Now, I don't consider some of these low-end sort of commodity products, rubber, toys, and the like, I don't consider that critical to national security, but there are a lot of other products that are. And there are a lot of people whose livelihood relies on these products. And if it weren't a problem that so much of this stuff that we consume is made abroad and not in this country, then I don't even think we'd be having this tariff conversation. That's why it started, because so much has shifted overseas, and the president's policies are designed to encourage, again, repatriation of this manufacturing. It will create jobs, there's no doubt, but not as it would have 40 years ago, as an example. Just because of the advances that have been made in automation and manufacturing technology, we just don't need as many people.
Just went down a mini rabbit hole, and if you are looking to get a new TV, you can get an Element Electronics. The brand of this line of TVs is Xumo, Xumo. But this is a 43-inch 4K UHD LED smart television made 100% in America for $138.
Wow.
At Wally World.
Okay. Well,
so it's an American-made TV available on the shelves at Walmart.
There you go. Okay. Well, that's a unique situation. So I bet if we kept going down the rabbit hole, what do you want to bet we find out? This company has got highly automated manufacturing capabilities. It's probably not one where lots of humans are involved in the production, just from a cost perspective.
If so, they must have a pretty big facility because they have branched out into a whole line of appliances.
Okay.
Fridges, freezers, ranges, microwaves, dishwashers, laundry machines, air conditioners.
Well, think about it. If they've perfected,
more power to them.
If they started out with manufacturing televisions and they perfected that production, I think that's easily transferable in many respects to making other electronic devices and just items such as appliances. It's somewhat different, but the automation aspect of it uses kind of the same underlying technology. Ben also says, I was reading where we already have 500,000 manufacturing jobs open right now, and we still can't find the labor for those openings. Yeah, that is a huge problem. I don't know that it's 500,000. That sounds kind of high because the last couple of months we've seen kind of a decline in manufacturing job additions, mainly because manufacturers are expecting lean times ahead because of the uncertainty surrounding the tariff process. But yeah, I agree. We have a situation with low unemployment and still sticky inflation. We're stepping aside for Fox News and SuperTalk News. It's Douglas Carswell with Mississippi Center for Public Policy. Hour of Middays with Gerard Gibert is brought to you by the Mississippi Business Journal. Visit msbusinessjournal.com. Scott Coopwood, publisher and president.
Get ready to go beyond the headlines and join a meaningful conversation with people from around the state. You're listening to Middays with Gerard Gibert here on SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. It's hour 2 of Middays. We are once again in the Element Wealth studio on this
Friday Eve.
It's our great pleasure to welcome now Douglas Carswell, President and CEO of the Mississippi Center for Public Policy. Douglas, always good to see you, sir. Thanks for coming in.
Gerard, thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Yeah, man. So we were just talking offline. As you know, I was up in Washington in the swamp, as they say, a couple of days ago. What an incredible event that was, and just so cool to participate. But you were just telling me you were there not so long ago as well.
Yeah, I was invited up for a meeting in the West Wing a couple of weeks ago with some of Trump's policy team. And it was wonderful, great opportunity to talk about the wonderful things happening in Mississippi. I wouldn't use the phrase, make Mississippi great again. We're already great. But some of the things we're doing to really move Mississippi forward. I mean, here's one thing I was telling them. In the past 5 years in Mississippi, there has been more economic growth than in the previous 15. And this is as a result of some of the public policy changes that are happening here in Mississippi. So it was great to be able to talk about that and talk about that story.
So do you feel like that the administration, the folks you met with, Douglas, were they just curious about, hey, what are you guys doing down there that's driving all this success?
Yeah, I think they're interested in two things. They're interested in what you might call the Southern success story. And I think they're also specifically interested in Mississippi. I think it's caught their attention. I mean, goodness knows, we've got a governor who's on Fox News often enough talking about this. I think they're beginning to ask, hey, what is it about Mississippi, the supposed 50th out of 50, that makes Mississippi unusual? Why is Mississippi doing these things and succeeding? So I spent time at the White House talking about that, and then I went to various think tanks across D.C. and was similarly invited to talk about it too. You know, income tax abolition, labor market deregulation, all the inward investment. It's a great story to be able to tell.
Yeah, it is. And you're right. The governor has rightfully been promoting and touting the successes here in Mississippi, and he should. I mean, he's the chief spokesperson for our state, and he should let the world know about these many accomplishments. Now, your organization has been recognizing some members of the legislature for some of their standout accomplishments as well. Tell us about that.
I don't think we thank lawmakers enough when they do the right thing. We're all quick to criticize those lawmakers who are the roadblock to reform, and boy, do I sometimes do that. But we don't thank people enough. I mean, take, for example, a lawmaker like Sam Creekmore or Hank Zuber or Trey Lamar. Mm-hmm. These guys have been working...
All in the House, by the way.
All in the House, or Angela Hill in the Senate.
Yeah.
They've been working away tirelessly on complex areas of reform. In Trey's case, it was income tax elimination. In the case of Sam Creekmore and Hank Zuber, it was to do with getting rid of all the red tape that holds back the healthcare sector. They put in long hours, and it's a thankless task. and yet they put in the real hard work. The media doesn't always cover it, but it's a huge amount of detail for them, and I don't think we thank them enough. And they don't always succeed. Hank and Sam Creekmore's bill, sadly, was largely filleted by the forces of the status quo in the Senate, but I think we should thank them, and I think we should celebrate them. And I think we should say when a lawmaker makes the effort to stand up for freedom and liberty and the things that we need to get Mississippi moving, we should publicly thank them and acknowledge them. So we had the Mississippi Freedom Awards this year. We had 6 lawmakers, and it was wonderful to celebrate that success.
Okay. Six different individuals in the legislature.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, Jason White, House hero.
Speaker of the House.
Angela Hill in the Senate, Sam Creekmore, Hank Zuber, Trey Lamar, and, of course, Jensen Owen, another person who heroically works away in the background delivering things that really need to change.
Highly focused on some school choice options, unfortunately, that met its fate in the Senate and did not become law.
Again, a similar story, the roadblock to reform in the Senate. There's a pattern emerging here. Good ideas go out of the House with lots of energy behind them to improve the state of Mississippi, and they go to the Senate and they're killed there. Now, the Senate leadership would have us believe that they died in committee, as though they were sort of lost under a pile of memos in the chairman's office. No. They were intentionally killed by the lieutenant governor and the Senate leadership, which is, I think, really sad for Mississippi. But I think people are beginning to see this. And as they see that these reforms that we need to grow Mississippi are being strangled intentionally in the Senate, I think people will begin to become restless and want change.
Okay. Interesting. So let's talk about the school choice issue. That's something that your organization advocates for. I'm affiliated with an organization that's been doing the same. And it just seems like that every year we run against the same objections and obstacles and can't seem to get across the finish line. Jansen Owen's legislation, House Bill 1435, very straightforward. It would just implement portability, public school portability.
Look at it this way. We're surrounded by 4 states that now have universal school choice, by which you can take public money to any school you want in one of those 4 states. What we're asking for in Mississippi is not yet that.
We're not at that level.
Given that last year we gave reform so that every child in Mississippi in the public school system has a dedicated budget, a dedicated number of tax dollars that is their money. All we've been asking for is that they can take that money from any public school to any other public school.
Yeah.
And even that has been blocked. And it's been blocked on the most spurious and fatuous grounds by people who, frankly, don't want to see their multi-million-pound budgets spent in the interests of the child and the student and the money going into the classroom. They want to keep their bureaucratic empire intact. And it's basically a struggle between the education bureaucrats, the fat cats, many of whom receive larger salaries in the public sector than the governor gets. It's the fat cats against the parents, and we've got to stand up for parent power.
Yeah, it's disappointing that didn't even get brought up for a vote in committee by Senate.
It got through the House. This is
talking about in the Senate, though.
But it's really important to acknowledge that it got through the House.
Agreed.
It's the first time it's ever got through the House, and it went through the House with a 2-to-1 majority, which is great.
Yeah,
and I think it bodes well for the future, because the coming people in Mississippi, the people who are standing up for ordinary Mississippians, left behind Mississippians, now have the bit between their teeth on this.
Yeah.
They will bring the issue back, and if any Republicans or notional Republicans running the Senate want to explain to tens of thousands of parents in Mississippi why they are going to stand in the way of good conservative policy and not allow Mississippi families the choices they have in neighboring states, I think they will be on a losing ticket.
So something I have really yet to even talk about on the show is that the state of Texas has also been trying to work through getting some school choice legislation through, and the governor, Greg Abbott, a big proponent of it. They just passed rather sweeping legislation in the House in Texas. Not sure what happens, kind of similar to Mississippi in the Senate. But this is something that Governor Abbott is really full force behind.
Abbott's completely on board with it. I mean, this is something that ought to unite every kind of conservative, from your traditional Reagan conservatives to your MAGA red hat conservatives. This is about giving parents control over their tax dollars. It ought to be, uncontroversial. The reason why we see it constantly frustrated and thwarted is because we have a Senate leadership that is opposed to this core policy. Now, they'll come on air, Gerard, they've come on your show, I think, and cryptically implied that they're in favour of this, and then whoopsie-daisy, it died in committee. No, that won't do. They intentionally are standing in the way of this core conservative policy. Now, if Delbert Hosemann wants to come out and say he's against school choice, he should come out and say he's against school choice. Let's have that debate. But what won't stand is this idea that he's somehow in favour of it, but whoops, it dies in committees under Chairman here.
I actually think he is opposed to school choice.
I think so.
He did indicate on the show and in other interview settings that he supports some sort of limited public-to-public portability, limited in that for what he described on this show as students that are trapped in failing districts.
There's always wordplay and sophistry.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so we didn't really get anything done there. That's my understanding, is that he was actually disappointed that a bill didn't emerge from the Senate committee that, as you know, is chaired by Senator Dennis DeBar. Yeah. Expected to get something out of that. Okay, so let's talk about some of these other members. We talked about Jansen and his efforts there with respect to school choice. What about Creekmore, Representative Sam Creekmore? What did he do to get your attention?
Well, certificate of need. Two lawmakers, Sam Creekmore and Hank Zuber.
Yeah.
A year ago, they set up a committee to look at the issue of so-called certificate of need. This is a technical term for saying that if you run a healthcare facility and you want to expand it, or you want to invest in a healthcare facility, you need a permit.
Yeah.
It's a Soviet-type system, and it's protectionist, and it intentionally restricts healthcare.
Yeah.
Creekmore and Zuber quietly looked at the detail, they took evidence from witnesses, and they came up with a bill that would remove a lot of the restrictions and the red tape.
Okay.
And I think they've done a great job. Now, they were frustrated and they were prevented from doing everything they wanted, but for the first time in Mississippi's history, in 40 years of certificate of need, we finally have a bill that has actually begun to address the problem.
Yeah. All right, if you can hang around, we keep talking. We've got Douglas Carswell. He's the president and CEO of the Mississippi Center for Public Policy. We're in the Element Wealth studio, coming right back.
From the Middays with Gerard Gibert.
What? This is so
Awesome. On SuperTalk, Mississippi.
We're back with you in the Element Wealth studio. We're visiting with Douglas Carswell, President and CEO of the Mississippi Center for Public Policy. I want to share this on the C Spire text line. I don't want tax dollars going to 99% white schools with unqualified teachers in districts with good public schools. So a couple of things I would say in response to that. First thing is it's a little bit I think, misguided to refer to it as tax dollars. We're really talking about the dollars allocated to each student. So it's really more the dollars that we're giving some control to parents to determine how best to invest the public money associated with their student, not just widespread global tax dollars, just that applies to the student. And by the way, that's $7,000 roughly per student in Mississippi. It's $10,000 per student in Texas, the state's portion, by the way. So of that, but this deal with the white and the black and all that sort of stuff. Here's the deal: nobody's going to sign up for an education savings account or portability to transfer to another school if they're already in a good school.
Yeah.
That's likely not to happen. So it's not like we're sort of detracting money away from a good school to a different school. If it's a good school, people are going to stay there. We're trying to help those that are trapped. I don't mean to steal what you are here to talk about, but am I right on this, Douglas?
Absolutely. I mean, the people who would benefit most from this would be a family or a mum in Hinds County who had a child who couldn't afford to go private, who would move if they could to a school with a better catchment area but simply couldn't afford it.
Yeah.
By giving them control of that $7,000, they would be able to go to schools like Redeemer, like Vineyard.
Yeah.
It's about helping them. It's not about subsidizing private schools.
And I actually believe that the parents or the caretakers, as the case may be, of the students that are most likely to participate are the very ones you want to help.
Yeah.
I mean, those are the ones who are going to benefit from this, and they're trapped right now.
If you're happy with the school you've got, great, stay. This won't affect you. It won't change it.
Yeah.
If you're not happy, you can do something about it. It's as simple as that. So, I don't think people can complain and say, well, everyone's happy with the way things are. You might be happy. Great, stay. But for those who are not happy, this gives them an alternative.
And, of course, the other thing that we should point out is that part of the rationale for this is to send the message to the poor performing schools, you got to up your game here. You're going to lose students, and they should respond. I mean, it's just simple competitive threat and pressure.
Yeah, but I think the slam dunk argument is that we're now surrounded. Yeah,
that's true.
Every family in Arkansas can now do this. Every family in Alabama. In a few months' time, every family in Tennessee will be able to do it. In a year's or so's time, most families in Louisiana. Why can't we?
And the president fully supports this as well. In fact, he appointed someone to serve, Linda McMahon, as Cabinet Secretary of Education, whose primary job is to dissolve the department that she oversees.
Yeah. And he tweets about this. I mean, I've never seen a president show as much interest in legislation being passed in Tennessee or Texas or Louisiana as Trump seems to show when it comes to school choice.
Yeah.
And if this issue comes up either in the special session or in the 2026 session, do not assume he's not going to be following this. He will be following this very closely.
Totally agree. All right, so let's continue the discussion about the certificate of need laws that we have in Mississippi that are we're one of the remaining states that have those in place. And they're somewhat onerous, but the bottom line is you got to say, Mother, may I get permission from the state government to do things like buy an MRI machine or expand your parking lot, add some more rooms to your hospital, stand up an emergency room, stuff like that.
The whole system was brought in to protect existing businesses and keep out the competition. I mean, imagine if there was a law that said, if Papa John's wanted to open a new restaurant, they needed to get permission from Pizza Hut. That would be crazy, right? Yet that's what you have with healthcare. And as a result, it means that in Mississippi, you have a small number of... Take, for example, kidney dialysis. If you need kidney dialysis, you've got a monopoly provider in Mississippi. And that's probably one of the reasons why if you need kidney dialysis in Mississippi, you have to go to a kidney dialysis center, whereas in most normal parts of the world where you have competition and choice, they bring a portable dialysis machine to your home. So it's less accessible, it's less good quality care. And the reason why we have it is because the existing providers want to keep out the competition.
Yeah.
I listened to one of the people giving evidence, and he basically said, if we get rid of the certificate of need laws, we might have to start paying our staff a proper wage because someone else, they might go and work for someone else. So it's wrong in all sorts of ways.
Yeah, I mean, what I would have given to have that sort of protectionism when I was in business, it was a wide open free for all. Anybody could sell anything to anybody virtually. So,
and I get it that some people look at the big hospitals in Hinds County and Jackson, and they're fearful that if you got rid of all certificate of need law overnight, it might have implications for the future of the three big healthcare providers in Jackson. I get that. That's why the Creekmore-Zuber proposal was so sensible, because it started with the things where reform would only have an upside, not any downside.
Yeah.
But, we've got something through the legislature. It's not much, but it's a template to follow. And we need kidney dialysis, I think, is, for me, the real biggie.
We got a little crack through there, bottom line. Yeah. We didn't get just complete wholesale repeal, but we made some progress there, which is, and I think, did we end up increasing the threshold for CapEx, I think as well, right? That required permission.
Yeah. But that was basically it. But, the initial bill included kidney dialysis and psychiatric and all the rest of it. But I think we need to come back with that either in a special session or 2026.
Yeah, and I think we're going to see more progress there. So let's talk about Representative Chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, Trey Lamar, and Speaker of the House, Jason White. I'm assuming that tax reform may have some play there. Huh?
Not just tax reform.
Okay.
I think we all know that they pioneered the elimination of the income tax. It's the style of politics that I think makes them so significant. Instead of cooking up a plan for tax reform behind closed doors, they had a public meeting in September last year. They invited everyone in Mississippi to come along, and they did it openly, and they built a consensus. And what they came up with initially probably wasn't perfect. There was back and forth. There was a bit of compromise. People chipped in. Because they did it openly, they got the math right.
Yeah.
Whereas when the Senate tried to do it with the triggers, they got the math wrong. And this style of openness that you see from Trey Lamar and Jason White, I think also helps explain why we didn't see a budget passed. For years in Mississippi, there's been an understanding that they will fix the budget behind closed doors in a weekend. And I think White and Lamar and this new generation of Mississippi leaders say, no, that's not how you decide how to spend $7 billion of taxpayer money. Many of your listeners will be familiar with the idea of a booster club in their school. You wouldn't put up with the people who run the booster club making decisions about spending the few hundred or few $1,000s for the booster club in private and in secret. So why would you allow your politicians to cook up the budget behind closed doors on a weekend? And White and co. have insisted that actually the budget is done openly and transparently. And this is why the Senate was unable to agree, and this is why there needs to be a special session. But I think this new way of doing politics in Mississippi that White and Lamar and co. are pioneering, I think it's so different from the good old boy behind closed doors, you scratch my back, I scratch yours way of doing things. And this is why I think their role is more than just about income tax elimination. It's a transparency that I think anyone under the age of 50 in Mississippi wants to see.
Okay. Fair enough. So ultimately, we got a bill passed that will phase out the income tax, albeit over an extended period of time.
Yeah.
That's the way it ended. What do you think about that?
The key in all of this is going to be, can we control the increase in public spending? Can we restrain public spending? If we continue to have budget surpluses, after 2030, we will eliminate the income tax. If we continue to spend taxpayer money like a drunken sailor, we've had a 24% increase in state government spending in 5 years, then that will erode the capacity to do that. So I think it's great news. It's really good. Now, the Senate, many of your listeners will know, designed a tax trigger. And the idea of the tax trigger was that after 2030, there would only be further reductions in the income tax rate if there were certain criteria met. And the trigger was designed to never be pulled. They rather gloriously got their math wrong and put the decimal point in the wrong place, so that ploy didn't work. So we will see the elimination of the income tax, provided we don't continue to spend money wildly. So we need to restrain public spending in Mississippi.
Look, we can continue that discussion on the other side of the break if you'd like.
I'd love to.
Yeah, we've got Douglas Carswell, President and CEO of the Mississippi Center for Public Policy, in the Element Wealth studio. We're coming right back.
Grab your coat and let's start walking. Come on, come on. 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 All this time the baby left that inflection in me.
Attention, adoring fans! It's time for
Middays with Gerard Gibert on SuperTalk, Mississippi.
We're back with you in the Element Wealth studio. It's Douglas Carswell, President and CEO of the Mississippi Center for Public Policy. So we were talking about spending, and of course in Mississippi, roughly 53% of our general fund goes to public education. And then next on the list in terms of spending categories is, of course, our share of Medicaid, which is upwards of almost 20%, I think, now of total spending. Actually, it exceeds that, I guess, with a $7 billion budget and a $1 billion Medicaid state share of the program. You can see kind of where we land there. And then corrections is after that, and then debt interest, debt service, and then really service, and then really the rest of government. But education, let's focus on that. You were mentioning before we went to break that we've seen the expense of education increase. You said 28%.
I think 28% in 4 years.
In 4 years. And outcomes, we have to be honest, outcomes certainly have improved. The governor has really promoted that, but I don't know that that's necessarily a function. He certainly doesn't say it is a function of the fact that we're spending more money. He says it's conservative policies.
Well, the number of students in the public school system has fallen.
Right, so we're spending more and we got fewer people that we're serving.
So the question is, where's the money gone? Now, some of it legitimately is improving teacher pay, and I think it's only fair to say that teacher pay had been held back and it was right to increase that to catch up. But not all of it went on teacher pay. There's been an explosion in the number of non-teaching staff on the payroll. Think of your local high school. There often will be a lot of people doing things that just weren't there 20 years ago. Yeah. And that is where a lot of it's gone. Now, I could say that a lot of it is to do with the bloated fat cat salaries of the school superintendents, but even those on $200,000, $250,000 a year aren't responsible for the entirety of the increase. But the problem is, as many people point out, the money is not getting into the classroom, and that, I think, is another reason why we need school choice. Because if you can take your child's pot of $7,000 and you can take it to a school of your choice, you're going to make sure that those $7,000 are converted into outcomes in the classroom and not into hiring another bureaucrat in the local school superintendent's office.
Yeah. And so I mentioned to you on the break, I just wonder if it would make sense to conduct an exercise where you just did a detailed contrast across a series of operational metrics of the high-performing districts and the low-performing districts.
It'd be fascinating, wouldn't it? I mean, you've got some very well-run school board districts like Clinton and DeSoto County. Now, they tend to be quite large, those ones, but it would be fascinating if the people who ran those counties sat down with the guys who run some of the less well-performing ones and say, okay, how do you spend money to do X, Y, and Z? I think that would be very revealing.
Encouraging our legislature to consider commissioning such an analysis. I think it would be very informative and very insightful. And I'm not sure how much these districts communicate and collaborate with each other to find out, hey, what are you doing that works or doesn't work? I don't know.
Probably quite a painful process, because if you've been running things a certain way and it's not great, you don't want to fess up to it, but maybe sunlight's the best disinfectant.
Yeah, absolutely. So I share with you that this is an exercise we used to do in the private sector among my peers, meet once a quarter, and you were required to disclose all your deep, dark secrets, good or bad, and you'd just be exposed to the group, they to you, and you'd compare yourself to all of them, and you learn a lot. I learned more from that than anything else, honestly. It's just being around people. Oh, you're doing that, and that's working for you, and maybe we could share something that's working for us that they were struggling with, and vice versa. Maybe that sort of private sector approach could work here in government, certainly in education as well, when we have these. Because it makes no sense. We got an A sitting right next to an F.
I think so. And the assumption has been, well, that's just the way it is. And I don't think that works anymore. If we want Mississippi to be prosperous, we need to fix public education.
Yeah, you're so right about that. That's a great point. This idea of, well, we just always done it that way. I just don't ever want to hear that. That's what I used to say. That's tradition for the sake of tradition and nothing else. Yeah. I mean, there's no really rationale for that. So, but you talked about we got to be responsible from a spending perspective. Education, of course, half of that we've seen, as you indicate, an increase of that. But in all likelihood, we're going to see a decline in revenues as we phase out the income tax. Now, I know we could certainly argue at the federal level where we apply the Laffer curve. There's kind of an optimum tax rate and tax environment for producing more revenue, and you go on either side of that and you produce less. I'm not sure that applies when you're zero, when your rate's zero.
Certainly the amount of revenue from income tax is going to diminish because when you get to zero in 2030, whatever.
Zero.
But I think if the growth rate we've had over the past 4 years continues, and I reiterate the point, there's been more economic growth in the past 5 years than over the previous 15. If that continues, overall tax revenue is going to go up. Now, we mustn't bank on it, but this is the miracle of growth. Once you begin to see the growth and that generates the higher tax revenues, if you can control spending, you then enter this virtuous circle of constant small surpluses but rising revenue, and that's where we need to try and steer the economy in Mississippi.
So one thing I would point out, I hear you, and I agree, and that's hopefully that will be the outcome, is that unless that translates to increased consumption and thus sales taxes, you're not going to have an increase in revenue. So we need a whole lot more people to move to Mississippi.
And that's beginning to happen.
I mean, a lot.
Yeah, we've had $19 billion of inward investment in the past 4 years. $19 billion. In a state of 3 million people, that is significant. I suspect
no doubt
the official data hasn't quite caught up with reality, but I think Mississippi, for the first time in 2 generations, is a net importer of people now. We're starting to see the growth. Look around Mississippi. There's a lot of growth on the coast. People are moving to Hattiesburg and Laurel, sometimes perhaps aided by a TV show. They're moving to Oxford and Starkville. They're moving to Flowood and Madison.
Yeah.
This is exactly every new housing development, every new factory. These are more revenue-paying tax generators, and we need more of that.
Just to do the math, go through the math though, and get your thoughts on this. To replace the lost income from revenue from income taxes, we would need to consume about more than a third of what we currently consume.
Yeah, I mean
that's a huge increase in spending.
We spend $7 billion. $2 billion of that comes from income. So
that's right.
How do you find that?
2.2 roughly.
How do you find that? The short answer is restraining public spending and growth. And you can do this if you achieve growth. If we continue to have the sort of growth we've had over the past 4 or 5 years, we can do this. The problem is that politicians have a habit of not doing the policies they need to generate the growth. If you got rid of all the restrictions on healthcare, that would boost the economy because healthcare is a really important part of spending. If you had school choice, that would boost the economy. If you removed some of the intentionally restrictive rules that Mississippi seems to specialize in, that would boost the economy. It can be done, but it's imperative. Mississippi has momentum. You've heard the governor say that, and he's not wrong. He's right.
No doubt.
Mississippi has momentum, but we need to keep that momentum by continuing the pro-growth reform agenda that people like Trey Lamar and Jason White are pushing for.
Yeah, I agree. There's no doubt that the governor has spearheaded a lot of this economic growth and momentum, and Mississippi is poised quite well in that regard. And I do think that will pay huge benefits. And I applaud the governor for being hyper-focused on that. I mean, that's the way, I believe, to address so many of the key challenges we have in the states with economic growth.
But this is why it's so important that the pro-growth reformers like Jason White and Trey Lamar prevail against the status quo guys. Because if the status quo guys continue to block reform, this whole thing will stall. And the problems you identify will come to the fore. Let's drive through school choice. Let's drive through certificate of need repeal. Let's make Mississippi competitive the way Arkansas is, the way Alabama is. It pains me to say, I'm not a native Mississippian, but I don't like seeing the Razorbacks do stuff that we could be doing. We're a much better state than they are. Let's embrace these reforms.
And while we're doing it, let's promote the fact that we're doing that. Let's get the message out to the entire nation.
I did my bit in the White House a couple of weeks ago, and it was such an honor and a privilege to be able to talk up what Mississippi is doing and doing. We've been a laggard for so long. We're not a laggard anymore. If we get these things right, we can be first at some things.
Yeah.
And that's what's so exciting about this.
Before you go, let's turn our attention to federal policy. We're trying to get the one big beautiful bill through and get these tax cuts extended. What do you think?
I'm in favor of tax cuts, but I worry about the debt. If you cut taxes but you don't cut spending, you basically give your grandkids a headache. And I don't want... I've moved to America. I've escaped a high-tax socialist system. I don't want America to become like Europe. So, yes to tax cuts, but you've got to cut federal spending.
And it looks like we're on a pace at this point in the fiscal year to produce about a $2.6 trillion deficit.
That is, sooner or later, you're going to be dealing with some serious money.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Appreciate you coming in, Douglas.
Thanks so much. Thanks.
Douglas Carswell, President and CEO of Mississippi Center for Public Policy. Coming right back in the Element Wealth Studio.
At Watkins Consumer.
Oh, come on.
Middays with Gerard Gibert.
All right, we are back
on SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Middays from the Element Wealth Studio. So we were talking about just trying to share the idea that economic growth, I do think, will be somewhat greater as a result of having a more favorable income tax environment. I support that, and clearly the governor does, and I do think that will be a factor. I'm just simply making the point that in terms of covering the loss of income tax revenue, given that the state, at the state level, only has two major sources of revenue, that's income taxes and sales taxes. A lot of people, I think it's fair to say, Rhino, mistakenly think property taxes, ad valorem taxes, right, are sent to the state, fund state services. They don't. Property taxes are local and county and school district. Look at your property tax bill. Those are the three categories listed, how much you're paying for school districts, for counties, and for municipalities. And in that order, that's generally how it breaks down the millage that's applied to your property. But the point I'm making is if you're going to eliminate or even just reduce income taxes, unless that translates, in terms of covering the revenue, unless that translates to an increase in consumption and thus sales taxes, the state has got to figure out a way to do without that revenue. I do believe that economic growth in general will drive more sales tax revenue. I completely believe that. It's a big number, though, is all I'm saying. If you look at trying to replace $2.2 billion of it, which is what we would incur in loss of income tax revenue. I mean, you can do the math on that. The state's portion of that, by the way, isn't the full 7%. It works out to be about 6% because we divert the rest of it to a little less than 6%, the rest of it to the city where the transaction occurred, and there's some of it that goes to an education fund. But in general, you can sort of do the math there. You got to spend about $30 billion, actually a little more than that, to make up that revenue. Well, that's half of what we spend today in the state of Mississippi. Half. And while, as Douglas said, getting rid of the CON laws, I do believe would expand the healthcare industry in our state. I'm with him. Keep in mind that a lot of what is provided there is not subject to sales tax. It would certainly increase local ad valorem taxes, county, school district, because you'd have new facilities, new plant and equipment, new accessible assets subject to ad valorem taxes. So that's why it is incumbent upon our legislature to hold the line on spending. I think what made this possible, and I would applaud the legislature here, is that when we got all this money from the federal government during the COVID period, unlike many states, we didn't spend every penny of it. We kept our budget in line, and thus we sort of learned to live with that budget. In the meantime, we have seen an increase in revenues in the state. Thus, we've been producing surpluses. And it's these surpluses that are giving us, I think, the cover to proceed with reducing income taxes. So if you took the surplus that we're producing this year, some $500 million, subtracted that from total income tax revenue of $2.1 and change, you got to replace about $1.6 billion of revenue. Again, doing the math on that on 6X at 25-30 billion of new consumption. On the C Spire text line, these are people from one part of Mississippi to another part, not new residents. Simply not true. I can personally attest to that, Rhino, having been out numerous times to the site where the big AWS project is under construction. I have met numerous people from other states who have moved here. There are 2,500 people doing construction on that site right now. So many, they have to park off-site and be bussed in to the site. I think you'll see 10,000 once this thing gets ramped up at full scale. 10,000 in construction. And that's pretty cool. And many of those will end up moving and living here. Not to mention the new employees that they'll be bringing on board as well. So the fact is, economic growth, new facilities, new businesses need people. Those people move here. That's the way to do it. And I guarantee you the governor gets this and he understands it. And so more people, they're going to buy more stuff. And when they buy more stuff, they're generating more revenue in the form of sales tax revenue that goes to the state government. And, of course, ad valorem tax revenues that go to the local subdivisions of government, the county, city, and school districts. But right now, it's time for a break. It's top of the hour. 38 special bumping us out of this hour. We're coming right back after Fox News and SuperTalk News with Jeremy Nelson, president of Element Wealth.
And now, another hour of the talk that keeps Mississippi talking. Middays with Gerard Gibert.
Begin your transition now.
Now on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. It is Middays, and we are live in the Element Wealth studio on this
Friday Eve.
We're pleased to welcome now the president of Element Wealth. It's Jeremy Nelson. Jeremy, thanks for coming in.
Always a pleasure, Gerard.
So you and I were just watching these markets that seem to be hanging on every word coming out of the Trump administration, and it's like that's driving markets more than the fundamental technicals which we typically expect would drive markets, like profit, you know. So
well, yeah, I mean, I think if you recall, it was 2 weeks ago or so, I was here, and one of the things I said was everyone needs to take a chill pill. Right. The markets were down. Don't panic. I mean, and now we've kind of seen a little bit of a recovery here.
Yeah.
But the markets were really panicked because President Trump and his administration were kind of saying, hey, we're not looking at the stock market. Well, then the stock market really started to sell off. It was quite concerned. And now we're starting to see a little bit of a change in tune. Some of the commentary that's coming, out of the president is, no, we don't want to fire
Powell.
And so they're starting to react a little bit more. Obviously, they reacted when the 10-year Treasury jumped and kind of backed off some of the tariffs. So they are seeing what's happening in the markets. They are reacting a little bit here, and the market's kind of taking a little bit of a breather right now from the selling.
That's what we're seeing. We got the Dow up about 400 points or so, and the NASDAQ up equally as much. And I think a lot of that's driven by news that First Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent yesterday said the current situation with the U.S. and China is not sustainable. He actually said unsustainable was the word he used. And the market said, okay, that means they're pretty serious about getting a deal done here. And the market's reacted positively to that. I think that was the big news. But then the regime over at the CCP says, no, we're not in any discussions. And the market kind of said, okay, because we were up at like 1,100 points at one point yesterday. Yep. We ended up closing at 400.
Yeah, it faded off. And, obviously we don't know exactly where those conversations are. But I don't think that China's just going to cave and roll over instantly on this, and I don't think we're going to cave and roll over instantly. I think that this is a negotiation and a conversation. I would say it's happening. I mean, I don't see any way that it's not happening, but I think it's going to take time to come to some sort of a compromise on what a deal and a framework is going to look like.
Do you think the market's overreacted to this deal?
No, because my opinion is that the froth has come out of the market. Right?
Okay.
We just got to overvalued levels, and we talked about that a lot at the end of last year where, look, the market's just expensive. We're still expensive. We're just not as expensive. So what I see is just a little bit of risk-taking coming out of the market. I don't think we've priced in the probability of a recession or that this is going to drag on. I think that the market is actually digesting this relatively well right now.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it almost feels like perhaps the market knew it was overvalued, knew we had froth, and was just, as it always does, looking for some news nugget to drive it out of it.
Yeah, I think that what you're seeing is institutions are lightening the load, right? And so we're getting a little bit of a rally here. A lot of it is retail flow, some short covering in certain positions. But I think that what you're going to see is as we get these rallies, you're going to get it. They're going to fade off here because there's still a lot of question marks, right? We're kind of getting to this point of a coin toss on is there going to be a recession or not. And so I think you're going to see institutions use strength to sell and lighten the load a little bit. And so I think there's going to continue to be a little bit of whipsaw here.
Well, from I guess a technical perspective, the thing that puzzles me a bit is that we have a $28, $29 trillion, $30 trillion GDP, and we import total about $3 trillion. It's 10% of GDP. Maybe I'm not looking at that right. Maybe that's not a valid ratio, but how could that have such a massive impact on markets?
Well, because little changes matter, right? So, again, if we think about it from the perspective of the tariff, right? The tariff is a tax, okay? No matter what anyone says, it's a tax, and it's not paid by the exporting country, right?
Contrary to popular belief.
It's paid either by passing it through to the consumer or corporations eat it and it hits profits. Well, if it's passed through to the consumer, it's inflationary. Now, I don't think, like some people are talking about, this is going to create runaway inflation. That's stupid. It's not going to. But it causes some inflation, and we're still at that point where we haven't hit the Fed's 2% target
of inflation.
And so it hurts the market from the perspective that interest rates have to stay up a little bit higher. The Fed can't be as aggressive in cutting, right? And so if interest rates are up, valuations on stocks come down, or corporations eat it, and now it's hitting corporate profits. So that's why little things matter to the market, because it adjusts valuations.
The market, though, feels like it's pricing in some sort of rate decrease in June.
The market is still expecting that we are going to get at least 2 rate cuts this year.
Okay.
And I think that that's probably a pretty good base case. I don't think we're going to 2%. I don't think we'll get all the way to 3 by the end of the year unless you had some economic damage. But, all things being equal, you are seeing you're seeing consumer sentiment really shifting negative, right? You're going to start to see, especially in this second quarter, consumption coming down a little bit, which ultimately does help with inflation. It does give the Fed a little bit of cover.
Yeah.
But I don't know that it's going to be enough that it's going to trigger this big recession at this point in time.
All right, so you had some earnings reports coming in, and we're expecting a lot of the big tech guys to be reporting here. Today? We got some coming in
There's
today?
Going to be, today and throughout next week. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so that, everybody's highly focused on that. But we're getting American Airlines coming in. Now, that's a stock that trades for, what, $9-10, something like that. And they are following suit behind several other big public companies who are saying, we can't give you any guidance. I think it was United that gave 2 sets of guidance. I've never seen that before. If this happens, this is what we think the company, how it's going to perform. If this happens, this is how we think the company's going to perform. This is crazy. No guidance. How do you buy stock in a company that doesn't issue guidance?
Well, that's the challenge, right? And you saw Procter & Gamble come out. Right, and they issued negative guidance, right? A lot of uncertainty. Now, why that matters is that it hurts hiring. Yeah. So at the same time that you're laying off a lot of government workers, corporations are holding back on hiring or potentially going to start layoffs because of the uncertainty. And we kind of get to this point where everyone just gets stagnant in a standstill.
They're frozen, paralyzed.
Because we're just waiting to see what the rules are going to be. And there's been some flip-flopping on it thus far, right? We're having these tariffs, then we're not having these tariffs, right? And we started out with Canada and Mexico, and then it was the rest of the world, and then we backed off of it for 90 days. And we haven't had any major deals announced at this point in time, right?
Right.
And so I think that corporate America, and I think consumers are kind of going, whoa, we just need to slow down a little. And that's why I do think we are going to see a slowdown in GDP growth. Not necessarily a recession yet, right? But you're going to see GDP growth rate slowing a little bit.
Well, and that's even most of the Fed governors are predicting that as well, right? Some are even predicting a contraction. However, Kevin Hassett, he serves as the head of the Council of Economic Advisors. He's saying 100% no way a recession. So, of course, like all economists, we got 2 different opinions here.
What people have to realize is that 68% of the economy is consumption, but 70% of that consumption is on services.
Right.
And that makes it very difficult, absent a shock like a COVID or a financial crisis, to see a recession in the United States.
Yeah, that's a good point. And which is why I think that there's a lot of misunderstanding about the manufacturing and its relationship to the overall economy. It's not what it was 50 years ago, not because manufacturing has shrunk. We've actually are producing more in this country now than we were 50 years ago.
Because of labor productivity and technology.
Right. But we have created this whole new series of services, and we've just had this massive expansion of the services part of our economy, too driven by technology and innovation.
Absolutely. And the other thing that I would point out is, we had balanced trade. Now, one thing I think for our listeners to really understand about this trade deficit is, in my mind, you got to look at goods and services.
Yeah.
And we are a massive net exporter of
services. Totally right.
But we've had an economy where in 1960 to 1983, we had balanced trade with goods. Household net worth growth has been higher since we've had the trade deficit because that money comes back in the form of foreign investment.
Yeah, that's so true.
So there's counters to all of this stuff.
Yeah, I agree. We got Jeremy Nelson. He's the president of Element Wealth. We'll continue this discussion on the other side of the break from the Element Wealth studio.
Covering the stories that matter most to Mississippians. Gerard Gibert. Middays with Gerard. SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Get a good job with more pay.
We are back with you in the Element Wealth studio, visiting with Jeremy Nelson, president of Element Wealth. So the market's looking for some clarity at this point, more than anything, and it feels like the announcement of a deal, signed deal, right? It just talking about it helps a little bit, but nothing like, I think, the reaction we would get if we got, as they say, pen to paper from two parties on negotiating a trade deal.
Yeah, I think that's the key, is that the market right now is saying, okay, we're in this 90-day holding period, and then we've even exempted a lot of things with regard to technology. And the market's saying, okay, we got 90 days here. They're going to get something done. They're indicating that conversations are happening, and so the market's kind of patiently waiting here to see what happens. The longer it drags out, though, and the closer and closer you get to that 90 days, it starts to get a little bit more tumultuous, right? Because now, are we actually going to get something done?
Okay.
Are these other countries creating their own trade deals, right, to be less reliant on the United States, right? So I don't think that we want to get left out of this. Ultimately, the president is 100% correct in that we have to do something about this trade imbalance.
Okay.
Right? 100%. Are we going to get to a balanced trade relationship? Probably not. And do I think that we end up with some sort of a tariff system, maybe similar to what the EU has, where it's minor, right? But it would help in raising revenue for the government to offset some of the deficit, right? But what we just don't know is, are we going to get there?
Yeah.
And the harder that we press, and the uglier that we are about it, right? It starts to turn those foreign consumers away from wanting to buy U.S. goods as well, right? So even if you get to a point where you said, okay, we've got this great trade deal, are Europeans going to buy American autos? I don't know, right? I don't think you're going to see Chevy Tahoes rolling through the streets of Rome.
Right.
It's just probably not going to happen. So, diplomacy in this is important. And I think we're getting to that point where it's a little bit more diplomatic now. I think the temperature is cooling a bit, but we do need to get something done here in quick order, because otherwise the markets will start to worry again.
Yeah, right now they're sort of taking a bit of a respite, I would say, just because there's been more positive than negative news on this front of late. When we went through a period of more negative than positive, of course, the markets sold off. But there are a lot of people, that are considering retirement, and they're looking at the balances in their accounts, their nest eggs that they hope to use and to fund their retirements, and they're understandably worried. What would you say to them?
One, we will get through this, right? Period, end of story. And what you have to remember is that you're not liquidating your entire portfolio all at once when you retire. Okay, so you don't have to lose so much sleep. Your nest egg isn't going away. It's fluctuating, and it's fluctuating a little bit more than usual right now. But you should have things in your portfolio, like bonds, like some emergency savings, to where you're not forced to sell your growth or your risk assets while things are down. This is why diversification is the only free lunch, right? And so if you're looking at your portfolio, though, today, and you're seeing price fluctuations that you're not comfortable with, well, one, the markets are back up. This is a great opportunity to really do a risk assessment, see where you are, look at potential alternatives. I'm quite optimistic because over time, I fundamentally believe that U.S. corporations are going to figure out how to play the game. And they're going to make more money. So in 10 years from now, I think U.S. corporations are going to make a lot more money than they're making today. Now, yes, in the intermediate term, in the short term here, there's going to be some turbulence. But you got to remember, when you own stocks are that longer duration, longer term asset in your portfolio. They're also the more volatile piece of your portfolio. So this is why you need to be diversified.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And that's pretty consistent with the message I'm hearing from investment bankers, wealth managers, economists. Yeah. That's pretty much the message.
If you're trying to trade this, good luck.
Yeah.
Because you don't know what Truth Social post or tweet is going to come out that's going to send the markets the other way.
Yeah.
Right. So trading this is troublesome because, again, I mean, you just don't know from one day to the next what the headline's going to be and how the market's going to react. We're seeing a lot of volatility. There's still a lot of money that was printed that's sitting out there and trading right now. 2021, or 2020 with COVID was kind of this real fundamental change in markets where trading and retail investing came back, and things have been pretty wild. Right? And so as you're creating a retirement plan, you need to kind of cut through the noise, cut through the emotion, be intelligent about what you're doing. And if you do that, it's going to be okay. Look, we got through the dot-com bubble busting. We got through the financial crisis. We got through COVID. We got through 2022. Right? We're going to get through this. But being emotional and reacting is what will get you in trouble.
Don't you think there's some folks out there, though, that perhaps had planned a date certain for retirement that may be putting it off now as
100%.
a result? Yeah,
100%.
That's happening.
I mean, if I was, I'd be holding back a little bit right now.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, as we're building plans out today, I mean, we're looking at balancing income growth guarantees, and we've got this scenario analysis that we're looking at where, hey, if this is the beginning of a secular bear market, which this could be, where markets aren't going to be as favorable for the next decade, how are we going to handle that? Right? But that's where you got to do the planning and make educated decisions, not emotional decisions.
Let's talk about the dollar. I don't know that I've seen so much controversy, so much discussion about the dollar, and I do think that's one of the things that the president's inner circle cautioned him about, which is one of the reasons I believe he ended up pausing the tariffs. But explain that to the audience, why that's important and how the dollar's value fluctuates against other currencies.
So the dollar has been strong post-financial crisis. Right. So for the last 16 years, we've kind of been in a dollar bull market. It's gotten to a point, though, where, hey, it's great if we go travel abroad because our dollar goes so far. It's great if we're buying foreign goods because our dollar goes so far. It hurts our exports, though, because it makes our goods more expensive.
Takes more of their currency to buy.
Now, there's two trains of thought. Like Ronald Reagan was a king dollar guy. He wanted a strong dollar, right? Because we were the reserve currency. That showed strength. I would argue the dollar's probably a little bit too strong, and it's hurting us to a certain extent right now. And so you're starting to see the dollar fade versus the euro versus the pound. I think we were almost at parity on the euro, and now it's like 113.
Yeah.
So it's been a sizable move. What you want to understand here is from an investing portfolio, you might want to think a little bit more globally in your equity allocations. One, international stocks trade at a significant discount to U.S. stocks. So it's cheaper to buy those earnings. But two, if the dollar starts to weaken further, you're going to see strength. And we're seeing it thus far this year. Relative strength in international investments for U.S. investors. If you go back to 03 to 07 or 08, international stocks basically doubled U.S. stock performance in that recovery. And it was on the back of the dollar weakening. Mm-hmm. So this is where within your portfolio you might want to think a little bit more internationally or globally. Doesn't mean go all in, right? But if you look at something like the MSCI All Country World Index, it's about 65% U.S., right? So maybe you want to be 70-30, 80-20, something like that. You want to get those international assets in because it's going to diversify you a little bit better. And if the dollar does weaken, that part of your portfolio is going to perform quite well.
Makes sense. So there was some concern, and I was one of them, about possibly the White House signaling they were in support of creating a new tax bracket and imposing more taxes essentially on all income over $1 million. But the Speaker of the House made it clear the last 24 hours, no, he's talked to the White House, we're not going to do that.
I think you want to avoid that as much as possible. You have to get into the idea of the marginal propensity to consume, though. The more tax relief that we have for middle and lower income families, they're going to consume those dollars.
Yeah.
Right? Whereas, somebody who's making $5 million a year, you cut their taxes, they're just going to save it. They're not going to consume it. Right?
But raising taxes on them may have
raising taxes
negative.
hurts their consumption.
No doubt.
So what you need to do is you need to hold those tax rates, not increase them.
I agree. I think that's where we're headed. Jeremy Nelson, president of Element Wealth, has been our guest in the Element Wealth studio. Always good to talk to you.
Always appreciate it. Thanks, Gerard.
Coming right back, folks. Stay with us.
From the Seabrook.
Middays with Gerard Gibert.
It is
on SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. Rubber band man there. Once again, we are in the Element Wealth studio. Are you thinking about or planning for retirement? Do you have a plan? Go to myelementwealth.com or call 601-957-6006 to let Element Wealth help you find your balance between income, growth, and guarantees. Also today on In a Mississippi Minute with Steve Azar, you'll hear an interview with a communications expert and motivational speaker, Randy Harrington. In a Mississippi Minute with Steve Azar is presented by Superior Catfish. Remember, there's catfish, then there is Superior Catfish. It's U.S. farm-raised catfish with homegrown flavor. Ask for it by name at your favorite store or restaurant. Go to SuperiorCatfish.com for more info. It's double-decker weekend in Oxford. The Sports Talk team is going to be in Oxford on Friday for the annual Double Decker Festival. It's one of the biggest events in North Mississippi. You don't want to miss it. And we're on TikTok, Rhino. Super Talk Mississippi is on TikTok. So at the event in Washington, I was sitting next to Joe Pags. He is, of course, a syndicated radio talk show host. Been doing it, he told me, 40 years. That's something. 170 stations now carry his program. That's what me and you ought to do, man. We need to expand our reach. But he said that he now has a presence on TikTok, 1 million followers. He's been doing it several months. And, of course, it's young people that don't listen to the show that often, but they catch him on TikTok. And so he shares a lot of his content, sort of repeats it in TikTok videos. And he runs into young people in his travels that recognize him, of course, from seeing him on TikTok. But he's getting compensated by TikTok because of the number of people. You know how all that works. It's substantial. I was shocked when he told me how much money he's making just putting videos out there on TikTok. It's pretty neat. It's and there, as you know, that's a whole industry unto itself. There are a lot of people who do that exclusively for their income, and some of them make a whole bunch of money doing that. They've come up with some shtick that attracts folks. Man, oh man. Pretty cool. Ben from Madison says, good conversation. Always, let's see if I can get my mouse to work. Always enjoy when you have Mr. Nelson on to talk shop. Yeah, he's excellent. Jeremy is. I've really enjoyed working with him and, of course, interviewing him as well. And so grateful about their sponsorship for our studio here, the Element Wealth Studio. I think it's been good for them as well. Do a great job. Let's see. My father-in-law started buying $200 bonds when my daughter was born. She just turned 24 and has 4 years' worth of mature bonds. Can we reinvest them or should we leave them alone? Okay, I'm sorry I didn't get that when Jeremy was here. I think he'd give you the standard answer. which would be just have a diverse portfolio. And that's really where he stands. I would say it sort of depends on what interest rate, what the average interest rate you're receiving from those bonds are, and maybe if you redeem some of those and reallocated that capital in other assets, that might make some sense. Just be aware it's a very volatile situation in markets. I mean, the bottom line is that fixed income securities such as bonds carry with them very low risk, especially U.S. Treasuries. But the income potential is also relatively low. It's just a risk-reward dynamic. The United States stock market, by far, is the greatest wealth generator on the planet from an investment perspective. But it's risky as a result. Now, nothing I'm telling you guys you don't already know, but that's kind of the way I would think about it. Larry in Maya says, I think Trump is pretty smart, knows what he is doing. I trust him. And I'm with you, Larry. There's nobody I'd rather have negotiating on behalf of this great country in this trade deal. But here's the problem, Larry, is that there are a lot of businesses that they want to be patient. They don't have time. They just don't have the capital to weather the storm. And they've built businesses around these, much of what they import. And a lot of that's so interconnected up and down the supply chain lines that it could cause problems if they can't get product to sell, for example. And that is just something that they just can't withstand for a long period of time. Talking about the AWS project on the C Spire text line, one part of that project alone is bringing in 800 or more electricians. Yeah, it was my understanding when we were talking about this 5 years ago from people who know about what's involved in electrical construction for these massive data centers. And just so you'll be aware, we're talking about 4 million square feet of data centers, and inside that, everything in it, not people, it's electrically powered IT infrastructure. It's servers, it's storage, it's virtualization technology, it's massive network technology. All of that stuff requires power, and of course the electrical wiring and cabling and all the switching involved for that, and that's extremely complicated, and it's a major amount of effort to do that. But where I'm going is we were advised by the people that know about that stuff more than I do that there aren't enough electricians in the state of Mississippi, if every one of them went to work on that project, to handle the construction. I believe that. And, of course, there's ongoing maintenance and support requirements as well when you talk about that kind of an electrical infrastructure plant is what it would be called. And then you've got the low voltage cabling, all the fiber optics and the copper cabling that connects all those devices. That's a massive undertaking as well, and a whole bunch of maintenance and support required on an ongoing basis as well. And we don't have enough people to do that. And Amazon ain't stupid. They've done this all over the country. They understand they got to import people. And that's good for Mississippi. That means more residents. And then you know what they do? They go spend their money. This is how you grow the economy. This is how we produce revenue to offset the reduction of income tax.
And while a portion of those that have moved in while they're working will move on to the next one when they're done, there's another portion that will move here and go, wait, I think I can handle being here.
That's exactly right. And some people I've talked to have said exactly that. We know how great it is to live and reside and work and raise our families, go to school, etc., in the state, play in the state of Mississippi. But it's a secret to a great extent. But when people come here, they say, okay, I get it. And they end up taking up residence here. And I believe that's what will happen. I'm convinced of that. No doubt. I know on the C Spire text line, I know market is taking a hit year to date, but personal opinion, it would have been worse or better with Kamala to date. I think to date it probably wouldn't have taken the hit that it has just because there wouldn't have been a lot of change. But long term, here's what would have happened. We would not have gotten a tax bill through, which is being worked on right now. And the Speaker says, still saying Memorial Day is the goal. to get that to the president's desk. For sure, that wouldn't happen, and that would have decimated the economy. No doubt about it. No doubt about it. Even if we had Republican control of the houses and they passed such legislation, I'm fairly confident, Rhino, she would veto it. It's certainly based on what she said on the campaign trail, and every Democrat says, you're just giving tax breaks to the billionaires and all that crazy rhetoric. So I do think that would have decimated the economy, no doubt. Let's see, as long as the courts bow down to the NAACP, you will never get school choice passed in Mississippi, says Mose. I'm not really sure about that, Mose. I don't know that the NAACP is a factor here. I do think race is a major issue. I absolutely do agree that, and I've said that on the program. I won't back down from that. But I just think the lieutenant governor in particular, he's made it clear. He just fundamentally opposes the idea of public dollars going to private institutions, in this case, a public-to-private school choice situation. But he did say he supported, you heard him right, he supported the ability of a student to transfer from a failing, I can't remember if he said district or school, but I seem to remember he just said, he may have been generic about it, not specific. Because there is a difference between a district and a school. You got failing schools and districts that aren't failing, such as the biggest district in the state, and that would be Jackson Public Schools. You got failing schools, individual specific schools, but the district itself, last I checked, is like a C. So it's not failing. We only have 3 districts that are below a C, so that's very limited. He did indicate support for that, but we couldn't get that through. What else we got? That filibuster is going to kill it. There's no spending cuts to make it revenue neutral. That's Thomas saying we still won't get a tax bill without spending cuts. Thomas, I just got to ask you, have you ever said anything optimistic or positive? Ever? Can you think of any, Rhino? No. This is, and I'm not just picking on him, it's people that come from that ilk. They're always negative, always down, always pessimistic. We're coming right back.
Middays with Gerard.
Good for America. Good for fans of justice and truth. Good for us.
SuperTalk Mississippi.
This is what we stand for.
Welcome back, everyone. It is Middays. Thanks so much for joining us. I wonder how many people would vote to recall Delbert the Democrat if we could, says Larry and Mize. I guess the question is why he prevailed in the last election in 2023. There was a chance there to vote for, and that was after him being in office for 4 years. There was a chance there to make a change, and it did not happen. Let's see here. Also on the C Spire text line, Andy says he opposes them except for the thousands of different contractors they already go to. What? Help me out, Rhino. What was that in reference to at that point in time? Not exactly sure what we were talking about there, but he also said above that, property tax goes up here like it does every year. Disappointed in the income tax deal with the raise in gas tax. I have run my numbers, and at best, it's a wash for me. So as far as I'm concerned, all that time and energy spent on it doesn't benefit my family. So when all this extra spending offsets the increase in gas taxes, will they go back down? Nope. So I guess just doing some research there, Andy, I don't see that. In fact, I see just the opposite, that in Tupelo, your millage actually went down based on the information that I found on property taxes. So I didn't see an increase reported there. But are you saying that the 9 cents additional excise tax on fuel per gallon would be more than the savings of 2% of your grocery purchases and the savings from paying no income tax? I have a hard time. You must drive a lot if that's the case. And maybe you do. He said, okay, I'm talking about public dollars going to private schools. Yeah, I get it. He definitely does. He opposes them except for the thousands of different contractors they already go to. Yeah, I mean, I've seen that argument as well, that, of course, the public sector does spend money on private sector vendors to provide services to the government. It's absolutely true. So it does kind of diminish that argument, I would say, that, because if you think about it, other educational services institutions, even homeschool, charter schools, private schools, other public schools, they're just providing services, government services, right? I mean, and by the way, all those schools and school districts, they too contract with third-party private entities to provide services to ensure the smooth operations of the public schools as well. I agree. So it's always been a little bit of I think, a misguided objection. I'm with you on that, Andy. Larry Ma says, you don't remember there was a runoff with Chris McDaniel? Yeah, I do. And the Democrats came out and voted for him. Well, I don't know if that's the case, Larry. We need closed primaries. He says, okay, well, that means, Larry, everybody in the state of Mississippi would have to register their party. We're a state that does not register by party. You can't have closed primaries unless you register by party. And I don't know that that's a popular thing. I don't know that most people want to register and commit to a party. So, let's see, I did receive a text here, just looking at it, from Senator Mike McClendon in DeSoto County. He says, we have school choice in DeSoto. Choose a school you want to send your children to, then purchase or rent a house in that particular school zone. I hear you there, Senator, but most people are not, many are not mobile and don't have the ability financially just to take up a residence in the district that services or includes the school that services that district they'd like their kids to attend. So I think I get it. I hear you. Just live where you can attend that school. That's easier said than done. Most people, certainly this day and age, with interest rates the way they are, they're not mobile. They can't just pick up and move. I mean, for that matter, you could say, well, just move to another state that does have school choice, or move to another state and locate in a district that has really high performance school. It's just cost prohibitive for the average family in the state. Will we get our chance to send Delbert the Democrat home when he runs for governor? We will, says Bubba in Starkville. As a state worker, I enjoyed your presentation the other day. I really appreciate that. That's Kurt from Columbus. Thomas says, I did some math. I spent $1,000 on groceries and junk for every $100 I spent on gas between 5 vehicles. Over what period, Thomas? If you got 5 vehicles, you spent $100. I don't know what time period that's over, but that doesn't sound like a lot. I also wanted to share this real quick before we go, and that's the folks that are part of the Public Employees Retirement System are really imploring that as part of the special session that the governor include a major component of funding for PERS as part of that deliberative process. Out of here today, back with you again tomorrow. Until then, stay safe and God bless everyone.
A SuperTalk Mississippi media production.